August 7th, 1942. Morning air over the Solomon Islands trembles under the rising heat. 40 miles south of Guadalcanal, at 19,000 feet, the engines of a P-38 Lightning vibrate through the cockpit of First Lieutenant Robert Hawk Harrington. The twin Allisons rumble like two metal beasts chained to a single purpose, their propellers biting into humid Pacific air, still stained with smoke from the night's naval bombardments. Sweat runs beneath his oxygen mask, despite the cold at altitude, and his gloved fingers tighten around the control yoke as the formation banks east to cover a flight of B-17s lumbering toward enemy-held Tulagi. He hears nothing but the engines, the faint rattle of loose plexiglass, and his own heartbeat pressing through the oxygen flow. The P-38 feels alive beneath him, twitching slightly as if eager to dive. Down below, the rolling green islands look peaceful, but every man in the squadron knows they are flying into the teeth of a Japanese response. A distant flash glints to the north, sunlight bouncing off metal wings. Harrington steadies his breathing. His wingman, Lieutenant Sam Fletcher, edges closer in formation, tapping his throttle to match the speed. No one speaks at first. Radios crackle with the static of distance and tension. Then a thin voice, accented and mocking, slips onto the open frequency. American pigs riding two airplanes welded together. Come down and fight if you dare. Harrington feels the line tighten inside him, though he keeps his face stone still. Fletcher mutters something under his breath. Everyone in the Pacific had heard the rumors. Japanese pilots calling the P-38 a clumsy giant, a flying barn door, a machine too big, too strange, too heavy to ever match the nimble Zero. They laughed at its twin booms, at its wide wings, at how it seemed to push air aside rather than slice through it. Far below the bombers, small dark specks begin to rise, like hornets leaving a nest. Savage Zero fighters climbing fast. Harrington adjusts his trim and pushes his mixture control forward. The Lightning shudders as both engines surge with deeper power. He checks his gauges. Temperatures rising but steady. Fuel pressure good. Oxygen flow constant. He feels the familiar vibrations through the seat, a reminder that even if one engine dies, the other will drag him home. That knowledge brings a flicker of confidence, though not enough to calm the pulse thudding behind his ribs. The B-17 formation holds steady ahead, their aluminum skins shining brightly against the clouds. The bombers look slow, vulnerable, like targets waiting to be plucked from the sky. Harrington taps the transmit switch on his throttle. Viper lead to Viper flight. Eyes up, tangos approaching low and climbing hard. Stay tight. An answering chorus of voices snaps back. Copy lead. Tight and ready. I see them. 12 at least. 12 becomes 15 as more climb into view. Harrington watches the Zero formation stretch upward in a perfect arc, disciplined and smooth, their silhouettes dancing in the sunlight. The Japanese pilots had good reason to be confident. Their fighters were light, agile, and deadly in a turning fight. They believed weight meant weakness, and the P-38 was twice the weight of a Zero. Harrington tenses his legs as he feels the Lightning's nose dip slightly with turbulence. He corrects it gently. The air is growing thinner, the sky sharper. Somewhere behind the mask, his jaw tightens. The mocking voice returns, clearer now. Come, big twin bird. Come fall from the sky for us. Fletcher exhales sharply. That guy's begging for it. But Harrington says nothing. His eyes lock on the enemy leaders. He knows the moment is seconds away. He can feel it in the engines, in the way the air hardens around the wings. The P-38 has never been truly blooded in this theater, not like the Wildcats and Airacobras. Everyone is waiting to see what it can really do. The Japanese expect an easy kill. A shadow passes across the canopy. Harrington tilts his head just enough to see the sun glinting off Zero canopies, diving from high right. His muscles clench as instinct takes hold. Here they come. The radio erupts with overlapping calls. Bandits at 2 o'clock high. Break them off. Keep the bombers covered. Harrington feels the moment stretch. The Zero formation pitches into a steep dive, their wings shimmering as they pick up terrifying speed. They are coming straight for the B-17s, straight through the lightning screen. He forces his breathing to slow. Viper flight. On me. We push now. He throws the throttles forward. Both Allisons roar, their combined thrust punching him back in his seat. The P-38 lunges ahead, its nose cutting into the oncoming wave. Harrington feels the vibration build as the twin engines tear through the air with rising fury. The first tracers streak past his canopy. The rounds flash past in thin orange threads, tearing through the space Harrington occupied a split second before. He banks hard left. The G-force crushes his ribs as the lightning tilts, its long wings humming with strain. His vision narrows, but holds. Fletcher follows tight behind, his own P-38 sliding into the curve like a shadow bound to Harrington's wing. Zero fighters dart past in a blur of white and red. Their engines shriek. Their pilots pull into rapid climbs, resetting for another attack. Harrington steadies his nose just long enough to drop a short burst. The .50 caliber guns vibrate the entire airframe. A line of bright flashes trails across a Zero's belly, but the enemy fighter snaps upward with impossible grace, leaving only a thin wisp of smoke behind. The Zero dances. The P-38 growls. For weeks the men had been told to expect this. Japanese pilots favored tight turning fights, exploiting their aircraft's feather-light frames. The Zero could twist and pivot in ways no American had thought possible. To many pilots, the P-38 looked like the wrong weapon for this kind of air war. Too big, too heavy, too unusual. That doubt had followed the aircraft from the moment it left Lockheed's assembly lines. Months earlier, long before Harrington found himself clawing through the skies of the Solomons, mechanics and pilots at Hamilton Field had lined up along the tarmac as the first lightnings arrived. They stared openly, twin boom tail, engines mounted on thick wings, a central pod like a steel egg suspended between two metal spears. The design looked futuristic, but also alien. More than one pilot muttered that it resembled two airplanes smashed together. Some thought it would never fly right. Others were certain it would kill the men who tried. Harrington had been among the first wave of young, hungry airmen assigned to the new fighter group. He remembered the day clearly. Sun blazing across the California field, the scent of hot asphalt rising in shimmering curtains, and a gleaming row of P-38s waiting like machines pulled from the future. He had run his hand along the aluminum skin, feeling the cold metal under his palm, listening to the faint ticking of cooling engines. Captain Ross Braden, the group's instructor, paced before the assembled pilots, boots echoing sharply. You treat this aircraft like a brute and it will kill you. Treat it like a thoroughbred and it will save your life. Those words had sunk in, hard. Training in the P-38 was unlike anything Harrington had experienced. The cockpit sat far forward in the center pod, offering a view that felt like hanging off the nose of a spear. Takeoff required perfect coordination of throttle and rudder. One careless touch of the pedal and the entire machine twisted with torque. New pilots called it wicked. Veteran pilots called it demanding. The aircraft didn't forgive mistakes, but if flown with discipline, it gave back speed, power, and stability, unmatched by any fighter in the American arsenal. Harrington learned quickly why Lockheed's engineers had been so confident. The twin engines were more than a design quirk. They were insurance, safety, endurance. On long Pacific flights where fuel gauges seemed to fall faster than the sun, every pilot knew that losing one engine didn't mean death. The P-38 could limp home. It might rattle itself half apart doing it, but it would fly. Japanese pilots didn't believe that. Not yet. They only saw a target twice the size of their own fighter. And in the early months of the war, their contempt echoed through every intercepted transmission. Big bird, slow bird, easy prey. Back over the Solomons, Harrington steadies his P-38 and checks the sky. The Zero that slipped from his sights has rejoined its formation. More enemy fighters are climbing, preparing a second coordinated strike on the bombers. Fletcher's voice crackles through the radio. They think we're slow. Let's show them they're wrong. Harrington pushes the throttles forward. The lightning surges. The airspeed needle climbs. He feels the raw power of both engines pouring through the yoke into his hands. The P-38 accelerates with a force that still surprises him, even after months of training. This is no sluggish heavyweight. This is a predator built for the long hunt. The Zero formation splits, half diving toward the bombers, half angling to intercept Harrington's flight. Their leader mistakes Harrington's path for a turning maneuver. But Harrington isn't turning. He is climbing, straight into them. The twin engines roar as the lightning rises with astonishing speed. The Japanese pilots react a half-second too late. Harrington punches through their formation like a steel arrow, his guns ripping a line across the sky. Fletcher shouts, "He's smoking, Hawk. You got him." The mocking voice on the radio is gone. Below, the Zero Harrington hits spirals downward, trailing a long ribbon of black smoke. The men of Viper Flight see it. The B-17 crews see it. And though the battle is far from over, a realization settles into the formation. The P-38 may look strange, but in the thin air where speed is life, it is beginning to prove itself. And the Japanese are starting to notice. The lightning levels out of its climb with a shudder, its wings slicing cleanly through a pocket of turbulent air. Harrington steadies the nose as Fletcher swings back into position on his right. Below them, a Zero spirals down in a widening trail of smoke that slowly unravels into the sea. For a moment, there is no taunting voice on the radio, no mockery, just the rhythmic drone of the twin engines and the clipped, urgent calls of American pilots, tracking enemy movements across the sky. Viper lead. This is Red Bomber 1. We're taking fire from starboard. Need them off us. Harrington banks, eyes narrowing as two Zeros latch onto the rear of the bomber formation, slipping into the blind arc beneath the tail guns. Their pilots fly with surgical precision, moving as one unit, their wings barely fluttering as they roll into firing position. Fletcher closes to Harrington's wingtip. We push through them. You take the lead, Hawk. Harrington acknowledges with a tap of his mic switch. He noses down slightly, building speed. The P-38 responds instantly. Trimming out the vibrations, he angles toward the bomber group, letting the engines rise to a throaty growl. The airspeed needle climbs past 320. The controls stiffen. He feels the pressure building along the wings, the lightning structure tightening as it slips into its element. Ahead, the two Zeros fire short bursts into the flank of a B-17. Sparks flash along the bomber's fuselage. A gunner returns fire, but his angle is poor and the enemy fighters are already repositioning for another run. Harrington breathes deeply. The oxygen mask grows cold against his face. He knows the Zero pilots expect him to turn, to try to slip in behind them. They expect a contest of curves and pivots. But he isn't turning. He accelerates. The lightning dives like a thrown spear, cutting a clean line toward the attackers. Tracers spit from his guns in a hard, steady burst. 1-0 breaks off instantly, startled by the sudden assault. The second hesitates a moment too long. His wing flares into bright orange sparks as Harrington's rounds tear across it. Fletcher streaks in behind, finishing the attack with a clean, disciplined burst that punches through the Zero's engine cowling. The Japanese fighter folds downward, smoke trailing from its shredded nose. In the bomber's top turret, a gunner pumps a fist through the glass. The radio comes alive. "Nice save, Viper. Keep them coming. The fight only intensifies." Harrington pulls out of his dive, leveling at 16,000 feet. Zeros scatter across the sky, engaged in twisting duels with P-38s as the bomber column pushes forward. The day is still young, but every man in the air can feel the shift. Something is changing. For months, the P-38 had been considered unproven. Even back at Port Moresby and Henderson Field, mechanics whispered about strange compressibility issues, impossible dive speeds, and rumors that the aircraft buckled too easily under stress. Pilots flying early missions over New Guinea learned these lessons the hard way. Harrington remembers one story that swept through the group before deployment. A pilot from the 39th Squadron, Lieutenant Wayne Kessler, had taken flak above Buna that shredded half his right wing. He lost the entire engine on that side. Fuel sprayed across the boom. Smoke filled the cockpit. Yet the Lightning stayed airborne. Kessler nursed the surviving engine for over 80 miles, descending gradually until he skimmed over the treetops and bellied the P-38 into the mud just outside Allied lines. The aircraft was ruined. But Kessler walked away. Single-engine fighters didn't give you that chance. Those stories had spread through the Pacific. Ground crews marveled at wrecked P-38s returning home with missing cylinders, broken props, entire tail sections peppered with holes. The aircraft seemed to endure punishment by sheer will. But seeing a Lightning land itself, no matter how battered, was one thing. Watching it fight was another. Back over the Solomons, Harrington watches two Zeros rise toward him from below. Their climb rate is steep, their engines roaring as they angle to intercept. Harrington throttles back slightly, letting them come. Fletcher moves wide to flank them. The Japanese pilots commit, rolling tightly to cut off Harrington's approach. But the P-38 has altitude. It has speed. It has weight in the right places. Harrington presses the yoke forward just enough to drop his nose. The Lightning responds with a clean, predatory dive. The Zeros try to mirror the maneuver, but their lighter frames buffet under the strain. Harrington's speed surges past 380. Air shrieks across the canopy. He lines up the leading Zero and fires a short, disciplined burst. A bright flash erupts from the Zero's wing root. The Nidas fighter rolls violently, then spirals downward, trailing pieces of its own metal in its wake. Fletcher finishes the second fighter, cutting across its climb with a sharp, rolling burst. For the first time, Harrington hears a new sound on the radio frequency. Not a taunt, not a boast, but silence. A silence filled with realization. The P-38 is not slow. It is not clumsy. It is not an oversized target. It is a hunter that chooses when to strike, climbing where others stall, diving where others break. As the bombers continue toward Tulagi, the American formation tightens. Harrington checks his gauges. Both engines hum cleanly, oil pressure steady, ammunition still good. Behind him, the horizon burns in the rising heat. The morning is only halfway through, and already word will spread among the Japanese pilots who survived the encounter. The big twin-tailed giant can climb, it can dive, and worst of all for them, it refuses to die. October 18, 1943. Early morning clouds drift in slow, pale layers over Bougainville as a formation of P-38s slices through the air at 21,000 feet. Harrington feels the familiar vibration of the twin Allisons through the floorboards, steady and confident, like two powerful heartbeats syncing with his own. The air is cold at this altitude. Frost clings to the edges of his windscreen. A thin mist trails from the wing edges as the lightning pushes forward toward the Japanese airfields below. The mission is simple in its orders, deadly in practice. Strike the enemy staging grounds before their aircraft can rise to meet the incoming Allied landing forces. P-38s fly as both cover and spearhead. Every man knows the Japanese will respond with ferocity. Harrington leads his flight across the coast, watching the dense jungle canopy unfold beneath them. A faint orange glow burns westward on the horizon as the sun climbs. The engines drone with perfect rhythm. Behind him, Fletcher maintains tight formation, his propellers biting through the thin air. Viper Lied Squadron. Hold your line, eyes open. They'll be airborne any minute. The first warning comes from below and left. A scatter of black puffs blooms upward as anti-aircraft fire gropes into the sky. Flak bursts crack like distant thunder, and fragments of shrapnel glitter briefly in the sunlight before falling away. Several P-38s adjust course, weaving through the rising storm of debris. Then the fighters appear. Zeros, dozens of them, lifting off from Tobera and Kara like insects erupting from the earth. Their wings catch the new sunlight, flashing silver and red. They form into climbing spirals, rising fast toward the attackers. Fletcher's voice cuts through the radio. We've stirred the whole nest. The Japanese commanders had been studying the P-38 for months. They knew it could dive faster than the Zero, climb harder, absorb more fire than a fighter that size ever should. They had watched pilots return to Allied fields in aircraft that looked like scrap metal barely held together by rivets. So on this day, over this battlefield, they decide on a different tactic. Overwhelm one lightning. Focus all guns on a single target. Make an example. They pick Harrington. He spots the shift immediately. A formation of Zeros breaks from the rising column, splitting into two intersecting wings as they climb straight toward him. Their precision is almost beautiful, their intent unmistakable. Fletcher sees it too. Hawk, they're locking on you. Break left now. But Harrington holds a moment longer. He can feel the lightning's readiness in the tension of the yoke, in the throaty growl of the engines. Sweat forms along his temples despite the cold. The Zeros fan out in front of him, their pilots confident, almost eager. They've mocked the big twin-engine fighter for too long. Now they believe they can smother it. Harrington finally banks, but the Zeros are already closing. The first burst of enemy fire tears through the space beside his wingtip. Another burst strikes the left boom, punching through the aluminum with a harsh metallic crack. The lightning jerks violently. Harrington steadies the controls. I'm hit, still flying. A second wave descends from above. Tracers rake across the cockpit pod. A round snaps against the armor plate behind his seat, jolting his spine. The oxygen hose kicks against his shoulder as the aircraft shudders. Fletcher dives in to help, firing a burst that forces two Zeros to peel away. But more come. 5, maybe 6, swarming the lightning in a coordinated spiral. Their machine guns sparkle like fireflies in the clouds. Harrington feels the left engine sputter. Oil pressure dips. A thin stream of smoke curls from the cowling. He taps the throttle, coaxing it, pleading with it. The prop keeps turning, but wounded. The Zeros tighten their noose. Back at ground level, Japanese officers watch the shapes twisting high above the ridgeline. They study the choreography. The lightning is engulfed. Its odds are hopeless. A few seconds more and the aircraft should fall burning toward the sea. But the P-38 refuses. Harrington pushes the nose down, and the Lightning answers with a deep, explosive surge of speed. The right engine roars clean and strong, dragging the damaged aircraft into a controlled dive. The Zeros follow, expecting the heavy fighter to break apart under the strain. But the Lightning holds together. Every bolt, every panel, every spar. The dive steepens. Air shrieks past the canopy. The controls grow stiff. Harrington fights them, sweat running down his neck. His teeth clench as the altimeter unwinds at terrifying speed. A Zero overshoots, unable to match the dive rate. Fletcher catches it instantly, firing a tight burst that punches through its fuselage. The fighter snaps sideways and falls out of sight. 3 more Zeros try to follow Harrington down, but their wings begin to tremble. One pulls up too sharply, stalling. The others break away, unwilling to risk structural failure. Harrington pulls out low over the jungle canopy, the Lightning groaning in protest. Leaves and treetops blur beneath him. The left engine coughs again, but keeps turning, wounded but alive. He climbs slowly, deliberately, nursing altitude. The Zeros regroup high above, but hesitate to dive again. They have seen enough. The Japanese officers below stare upward in disbelief. The aircraft that should have died has escaped. The P-38 drags itself back into formation, bullet holes stitched across its wings, smoke trailing from its boom, but still flying in a straight, proud line. Fletcher exhales loudly over the radio. "Hawk, you're a ghost. They threw the whole field at you." Harrington wipes frost and sweat from the inside of his mask. Still here. Still with you. Across the sky, the Japanese formation wavers. Their confidence fractures. They have seen the giant take wounds no fighter should endure and return to the fight. From this day forward, they stop laughing. The left engine wheezes like an exhausted animal, coughing out thin streaks of dark oil that trail behind the Lightning in a wavering ribbon. Harrington feels the vibration through the yoke, a harsh, uneven tremor that pulses up his arms. The gauges tell the truth in cold, steady needles. Oil pressure low, temperature rising. Prop RPM unstable. The wounded Allison will not last long. He steadies his breathing. Viper laid to Viper flight. I'm losing the port engine. Keep the pressure off me. Fletcher slides into position just above and behind him, a silent guardian. More P-38s drift toward Harrington, forming a loose, moving shield as they pull away from the main engagement. High above them, the remaining Zeros spiral aimlessly, disorganized by the failed ambush and the sudden resilience of their prey. A few attempt half-hearted dives, but the American formation is too tight, too alert, and the Japanese pilots hesitate. Below, Bougainville's dense green canopy stretches out like an endless sea. Far to the southeast lies the thin strip of Allied-held coastline where Harrington must go. He trims the Lightning carefully, coaxing every ounce of stability from the trembling airframe. The left engine surges unevenly, then begins to feather itself. A harsh metallic rattle echoes through the cockpit pod, loud enough to drown out the steady hum of the right engine. Fletcher's voice comes on the radio, low and controlled. "Hawk, she's going to quit. Get ready to shut it down clean." Harrington taps the switch with gloved fingers slick with sweat. The prop blades on the left engine slowly lock into feather, cutting drag. The remaining engine snarls with renewed authority, as if rising to the challenge alone. The Lightning tilts slightly, but Harrington catches it with smooth pressure on the rudder. Every motion requires precision. Every mistake could send the aircraft spinning into the jungle below. A calm voice from the rear flight joins the channel. "Viper lead, this is Echo 2. We've got your 6. Bring her home." Harrington doesn't answer. He needs every breath, every second of focus, for the machine beneath him. He listens to the right engine. Its rhythm is strong, steady, almost comforting. If it falters, nothing will save him. Miles pass slowly. The sky grows brighter as the sun climbs. Clouds shift in long, silent curtains around the formation. Harrington can smell the faint scent of burning oil leaking through the ventilation system. His oxygen mask tastes metallic, and frost gathers along the edges of his goggles. At 12,000 feet, with the jungle unfolding in dark waves beneath him, the radio crackles again. Red Bomber 1 to Viper lead. We watched you dive out of that mess. Didn't think anything with 2 wings could take that many hits. You're clear all the way in. Godspeed. The bomber crews had seen everything. So had the Japanese. Fletcher edges closer. Talk to me, Hawk. How's she holding? Harrington feels the aircraft judder as turbulence bumps the right wing. He corrects. Slowly, carefully. She wants to fly, that's enough. He lowers altitude gradually to preserve fuel. The P-38 sinks in long, smooth curves toward the coast. The shoreline emerges ahead, thin strips of sand, pockets of mangroves, and the faint line of the Allied airstrip cutting through the trees like a scar of civilization. Viper laid. This is Henderson Control. We have you on visual. Smoke trailing your 9 o'clock. Emergency runway clear. You are green to land. Harrington acknowledges with a slight tap of the mic. Words would waste breath. At 2,000 feet, the wounded Lightning trembles again, harsher this time. The damaged boom flexes in the wind. Harrington holds his breath, feeling every creak in the frame. The final approach begins. The single functioning engine pulls the aircraft steadily toward the runway. Ground crews scramble along the tarmac, watching the dark streak of smoke smear across the morning sky as the Lightning descends. The wheels extend with a grinding groan, one locking reluctantly into place. Fletcher hovers just above Harrington's right wing, ready to intervene in whatever way a wingman can. The runway rises. The Lightning settles. Tires kiss the earth. Bounce once, then again. Harrington fights the yaw with delicate rudder pressure as the aircraft tries to veer toward the dead engine. Dust kicks up around the landing gear. The right engine throttles back. The aircraft rolls, slows, and finally comes to a shuddering halt halfway down the strip. Harrington exhales for the first time in what feels like hours. Ground crew rushes forward. They stare in disbelief at what remains of the Lightning. Dozens of bullet holes pepper the wings. A long, jagged tear splits open the left boom. Oil seeps across the cowling. One stabilizer hangs by a few tortured bolts. But the aircraft is whole. It brought him home. Fletcher taxis in beside him, canopy sliding open. Hawk, that was suicide in slow motion. But she did it. She got you back. Harrington rests his head on the seat for a moment, feeling the thrum of the single surviving engine as it winds down. He looks at the wreckage of his aircraft. She always does. Later, a Japanese pilot who survived the battle would write in a captured diary about the sight of the big American fighter falling through the sky, returning from a storm of gunfire that should have destroyed it. He wrote simply that the twin-engine bird refused to die. And from that day forward, no pilot in the Japanese forces laughed at the P-38 Lightning. The P-38 shuddered as Lieutenant Henry Caldwell dragged it lower, the control column trembling under his gloves. Smoke seeped from the starboard engine, curling into the cockpit like a slow, sinister fog. He tasted metal on his tongue. The smell of burnt oil clung to the air. Below him, green Pacific water flashed between breaks in the cloud layer. Above him, the sky still carried the fading echoes of the last burst of 7.7 millimeter tracers that had tried to finish him off. The Japanese fighters had peeled away only when his wingman, Lieutenant Mark Delaney, carved across their flight path in a clean, high-speed pass that scattered them long enough for Caldwell to break away. Caldwell forced the P-38 into a shallow descent, feeling the wounded aircraft resist every command. The left engine hummed steadily. The right engine coughed, sputtered, then slammed into a heavy vibration that rattled the cockpit frame. Warning lights flickered across the dashboard. He tapped the glass with a gloved knuckle, but the engine temperature gauge stayed buried in the red. Delaney's voice crackled through the radio, breathless. "Lightning 2 to Lightning 1. Your starboard props shedding oil." "How bad is she?" Caldwell steadied his breathing, watching another ribbon of smoke drift past the canopy. "Bad enough. I'm feathering it." He reached for the prop control and eased it back. The failing engine's propellers slowly locked into place, stopping its wild spin. The sudden silence from that side of the aircraft felt unnatural. The P-38 banked hard, nearly slipping into a roll before Caldwell fought it level again. The aircraft groaned like a wounded animal. The jungle shoreline of New Guinea stretched ahead. Caldwell knew the base at WWII was still miles away. The distance felt impossible with one engine dead and the other flying hotter each second. Delaney stayed tight on his wingtip, scanning the sky for returning zeros. The Japanese pilots had mocked the Lightning at first. They called it two airplanes welded together, a clumsy giant that couldn't match the Zero's tight turns. Some even joked that if one engine failed, the P-38 would spiral into the sea. But the pilots who survived dogfights with the Lightning learned the truth the hard way. Caldwell's surviving engine rallied, pushing the plane forward with a steady, determined rumble. The twin-boom frame held firm, even with holes punched clean through the right wing. Sunlight cut through one of them like a blade. He tapped his compass, adjusting slightly south. The horizon shimmered in the heat, the kind that distorted distance and made the ocean look like molten glass. Sweat dripped into his eyebrows, stinging his vision. Delaney's voice cut through again. "Keep her straight. I'll call it in. Tower needs to prep for a one-engine landing." Caldwell nodded, even though no one could see him. The P-38 responded sluggishly, like it was drifting half asleep. Every correction demanded force. Every vibration felt like a threat. He tightened his grip on the throttle. Not now. Not when home was so close. The coastline grew sharper. Palm trees lined the edge like dark spines. Inland, low ridges rose under a veil of thin morning mist. Caldwell knew that somewhere behind those ridges, the airstrip waited. The radio buzzed with a new voice. "WWII Tower to Lightning 1. We've got you on approach. Wind steady from the east. Runway 2 is clear. Bring her in shallow." Caldwell's breath fogged the inside of his oxygen mask as he exhaled. "Copy, Tower. 1 engine out, hydraulics unstable. Might lose brakes." "We'll catch you, Lightning 1. Just get her down." The P-38 sank lower, skimming barely above the treetops. The left engine groaned under the strain, but it held. Shadows of the trees flickered across the canopy. Caldwell lowered the landing gear handle. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding protest, the wheels locked into place. Delaney's voice returned, low and urgent. "You're doing it. Keep her steady. I'm right here." The runway appeared between the trees, a pale strip carved out of the jungle. Caldwell eased the throttle back. The remaining engine whined, slowing. The Lightning dipped, wavered, then aligned with the dirt strip. The wounded aircraft roared toward the ground. The wounded aircraft roared toward the ground. Caldwell held the control column tight, feeling the vibration ripple up his arms. The P-38 sank across the final stretch of treetops, its left engine laboring, its right engine silent and charred. Wind buffeted the canopy. The entire frame felt like it was stitched together by sheer will. He fought the urge to flare early. Too slow and she would stall, too fast and she would skip, veer, and tear herself apart. Dobodura's dirt runway shimmered like a narrow lifeline across the jungle floor. Dust devils spiraled on its edges, where the morning heat rose. "Lightning 1, you're looking good," came the calm voice from the tower. Caldwell didn't feel good. He felt the P-38 yaw slightly to the dead engine's side. He corrected with a firm push of rudder, his boot slamming it down through resistance that felt heavier than usual. Hydraulics complained, hissing beneath the floor plates. The main landing gear touched first. A jolt slammed through the cockpit, rattling his teeth. The wheels bounced once, then bit into the dirt. A plume of dust exploded behind him. The Lightning lurched to the right. Caldwell wrestled with the controls, dragging the aircraft straight. "Come on, hold." The nose gear slammed down. Another violent shudder. The entire airframe groaned. His left engine sputtered under low throttle. He eased it back more, bleeding speed. The runway rushed past him in a blur of earth and heat haze. The right wing dipped dangerously toward the ground for a heartbeat. He countered, muscles straining. The brakes responded sluggishly. He pumped the pedals, coaxing pressure back into the lines. The P-38 skidded, wheels digging twin scars through the dirt. Dust hammered against the fuselage. The end of the runway approached fast, marked by a thin line of palms shaking in the prop wash. Caldwell gritted his teeth. "Stop. Please stop." The Lightning groaned again, its momentum dying in unsteady jerks. The last of the runway fell away beneath him. Finally, the aircraft lurched into a hard roll, wobbling as it slowed, then dipped into a shallow rut and came to a gasping, shuddering halt. Silence fell over the cockpit, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal. Caldwell slumped back in his seat, chest rising and falling. His helmet felt suddenly heavy. Sweat dripped down his temples. For a moment, all he heard was his own breathing. Then Delaney's P-38 swept overhead, throttling back as he lined up for his own landing. The tower burst through the radio. "Lightning 1, you're down. Medical and repair crews are en route. Sit tight." Caldwell pulled off his oxygen mask and let the humid New Guinea air fill his lungs. It smelled of dirt, fuel, and burning rubber. It smelled like survival. Ground crew jeeps raced across the strip, kicking up clouds of dust. As they approached, the men stared wide-eyed at the wrecked starboard engine. Its nacelle shredded, oil streaked across the fuselage, and dozens of bullet holes punched clean through the right wing. One mechanic climbed onto the wing, speechless, running his hand across a fist-sized hole near the cockpit that had missed Caldwell by inches. Another shook his head. How in the hell did she stay in the air? Caldwell didn't answer. He simply rested his hand on the P-38's battered dashboard, feeling the metal tremble under the final stages of cooling. The Lightning, despite everything, had brought him home. Behind him, Delaney's P-38 rolled to a smooth stop and taxied toward him. He popped his canopy and shouted across the distance. "That's why they fear it, Henry. They can punch it full of holes and it still won't die." Caldwell managed a faint, exhausted smile. The Japanese pilots had mocked the Lightning's size, its twin engines, its unconventional shape. But the men who survived encounters with it learned something different. The P-38 wasn't just a fighter. It was a survivor. A beast that could limp, bleed, and still claw its way back to friendly soil. Caldwell climbed down the ladder as medical corpsmen reached him. His legs trembled when they touched the ground. He looked back one last time at the wounded aircraft. The twin boom silhouette stood against the jungle's sunlight, proud even in damage. A machine built to endure what others couldn't. Caldwell stood beside it, one hand resting on the warm metal of the fuselage, feeling the thrum of the engine dying away beneath the skin. He watched the ground crew swarm around the aircraft, shouting to each other as they inspected damage that would have killed any single-engine fighter in the theater. Fuel lines were shredded. Hydraulics were leaking. The starboard nacelle looked as if it had been chewed apart by a mechanical beast. Yet the P-38 had dragged itself home. Crew Chief Sergeant Will Haskins jogged up, toolbox thumping against his leg. He stopped cold when he saw the right side of the aircraft. His jaw tightened. "Captain, we thought you were gone." Caldwell shook his head, still catching his breath. Almost was. Haskins climbed onto the wing, peering into the mangled innards of the engine bay. He whistled low. If a Zero took this kind of damage, it'd be floating in the Bismarck Sea right now. Caldwell met his eyes. "That's why we fly these." Medics walked him toward a jeep, but he turned for one last look. The Lightning stood in the dust, tail high, twin booms gleaming despite the scars. It looked defiant, like it had something to prove. The Japanese had misunderstood it from the start. They judged it by its size, its bulk, its unorthodox shape. They saw two engines and thought it meant double the drag. They saw twin booms and thought it meant a clumsy target. They didn't understand what America had built. By the time Caldwell reached the flight tent, intelligence officers were already gathering reports. Pilots scribbled notes. Radios crackled with chatter from other squadrons. The day's engagement had rattled the Japanese units along the northern New Guinea coast. Word came in from coast watchers and signal intercepts. Enemy pilots were beginning to warn each other about the Lightning's climbs, its dives, its ability to absorb punishment and vanish into the sky before they could finish it. One intelligence officer, Lieutenant Ron Manfred, looked up from a map scattered with grease pencil markings. "Henry, they're calling it the Two-Tailed Devil now." Caldwell eased onto a crate, his muscles finally letting go of their rigid tension. "Let them call it whatever they want." Manfred nodded. But they're not laughing at it anymore. Outside, the sun shifted behind a bank of clouds, throwing long shadows across the airfield. The distant rumble of engines echoed from another patrol forming on the runway. Crews tightened bolts, loaded ammunition belts, checked fuel lines, and slapped mud off their boots. The squadron's P-38s lined up nose to tail, gleaming in the humidity, ready to rise again. Caldwell watched them, feeling a familiar pulse in his chest. Every pilot who flew the Lightning knew that the Pacific was a graveyard for the unprepared. Aircraft went down in jungle ravines, vanished into the ocean, disappeared behind volcano ridges, with no hope of recovery. Survival out here depended on skill, luck, and the strength of the machine beneath you. The P-38 delivered that strength. Caldwell stood, exhausted but steady. "Send the word back to command," he said quietly. "The Lightning's doing exactly what it was built to do." Manfred folded his arms. "What's that?" Caldwell looked toward the battered silhouette of his fighter, still surrounded by ground crew. "Bring its pilots home." A new flight roared down the runway, engines screaming as they lifted into the humid sky. The Lightning's twin booms caught the sunlight as they climbed, splitting the clouds like a blade. The Japanese would meet them again. But now, they knew what they were facing. A fighter that refused to die.